Hello and welcome back, and yes, that's right, it's time for another SSD test in the PS5, and now it's time for probably one of the most popular drives at the moment. It's been around for better part of more than 2/3 of a year. It is the WD Black SN850. A heavily tipped drive for a long time, and one that's had some pretty heavy recommendations for use on the PS5. Now, in this video, recorded from home right now, I apologise for the sound quality. We're going to be doing the same test we've been doing before. We're going to bench test a bunch of games. We're going to compare how they, the load time between it and the internal storage. We're going to do side-by-side comparisons. Of course, I'm only going to be able to see the WD Black SN850 testing. You're going to see it for yourself on screen though. And throughout this test, we will be utilising this drive. It's the 500GB drive, and we're going to be going through the benchmark that the PlayStation gives it itself. We're going to look at the console management, we're going to look at the storage management, and these games. Before we go any further though, let's go ahead and format that SSD so we can get the PlayStation's own benchmark for this SSD. Now, we have got reported 6,457 megabytes per second. That is sequential read, in other words known as big reading, normally quite heavily associated with gaming. And 6,457 is a great number there, well in excess of the recommended 5,500 that expansion SSDs are told they have to utilize. But for now, let's go ahead and let this drive continue to the boot sequence of PS5's own desktop there. We go into the storage manager as well. We're going to be able to check that out a little bit further as well. There's the beta. We're of course running the beta 2.0 in order to look at this drive, and we're going to head straight into the storage manager there at the top. Going to go straight in. There's our console storage, and boom, there is our 500 gig WD Black SN850. And the first thing we're going to do, much like my other videos, is we're going to transfer the games over for today's test. I want to make sure you guys see it from beginning to end. The games we're going to be testing are A Plague's Tale, Wreckfest, Maneater, Control, and Destruction All-Stars. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I was featuring Destiny, but a lot of you were keen to point out that this has a lot of background server communication, which kind of undermined a lot of those test results. And I will be revisiting that later, but we've dropped that from the test lineup, and we're going to go for these games. First thing we want to do, of course, is to transfer them over to the SSD, the WD Black SN850, in order to see how it performs. So we're going to select our 5 games, and we're going to go ahead and move them over to the SSD there. And again, a couple of things straight off the bat. First and foremost, a number of you have been keen to also highlight to me that you wish I was utilising some of the heavy hitter games, your Spider-Man Miles Morales, your Rift Apart, your Demon Souls. Now, I've purposely avoided those because they are going to be featured in the SSD head-to-head comparisons. Follow-up videos next week where we will be looking at comparing the direct performance of the most popular drives of all of these tests. That's going to be this WD Black SN850. It's going to be the Seagate Firecuda 530. It's going to be the Sabrent Rocket Plus, and it's going to be the Samsung 980 Pro. We're going to be comparing all 4 of those SSDs together, and we're going to be comparing them against console storage. And in those videos, we're going to be looking at Rift Apart, Demon Souls, and Spider-Man Miles Morales, the games that are arguably some of the best ones at utilising the PlayStation superfast storage there. So again, that's why they've not been featured, but they are going to be featured. The reason I've been going for these smaller games is because in these bench tests, I'm trying to get as many games as possible in a simple video and not go too crazy on the time. Maybe trying to keep these videos for between 8 to 12 minutes each, because there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of SSDs to test, and it's really just a question of the numbers. The other thing I'm going to highlight, if you've not watched my other tests, you may be wondering why, right now, why is it taking so long for this data to be moved over to the SSD, given that both the internal and the internal SSD of the PlayStation and the WD Black SN850 are both insanely sped SSDs. And that is because the PlayStation 5 clearly is doing some kind of, if not encryption and compression, then definitely some kind of block container work between the internal console and the SSD. Maybe it's for security purposes and to avoid piracy. Maybe it's a certification. We're not sure. But ultimately it means that you can't really measure write exceptionally easily on the PlayStation because it's doing all this stuff in the middle while transferring that data over. And the result is that whatever benchmark you're going to get, clearly it's going to cause a bottleneck on any SSD we test. So unfortunately we're not able to test sequential write right now on the PlayStation, but we will come back to that later on because I know a number of you thought I was maybe a little hard on the WD Black in some of my early videos when I was talking about how some of the smaller capacities of the Samsung 980 and the WD Black, a lot of these SSDs at the smaller 500 gig or even 250 in some cases had very poor sequential write. And I know right now no one's really prioritizing that, but I think it's remiss to overlook it that things might change down the line as Sony might update things in their PlayStation software and allow other kinds of activities such as live recordings to take place on external storage. It's not supported now, but it might be one day. So we've transferred these games, as you can see there. If we go into the storage manager, we'll be able to see that that empty drive has now got 370.2 gigabytes on board. So we're pretty much all set up really for our testing. So let's go through the games. We're going to start with Destruction All-Stars. As mentioned in a previous video, again, a lot of back references here, how terribly reverential. With some of these games like Destruction All-Stars, there's a little bit too much of a build-up with publisher logos and stuff like that. So I don't want to measure their performance from here because I think a lot of them, it's going to be very hard to compare them without those publisher logos being a bit of a problem, little pop-ups like the one you saw. So in the case of Destruction All-Stars, when we're comparing the internal SSD versus the WD Black SN850, we are starting a game like this from the title screen. We're going to go from arcade, we're going to flick through the options incredibly quickly, and we're going to compare this SSD versus the internal SSD split screen. So right now, 1, 2, 3, go. And here we are. We've gone through the preliminary options there. As I mentioned in my Fire CUDA video, this game uses quite an impressive background loading system here, because even though there's live assets here on screen that are very unique to every play, all of the building is happening in real time right now with this. So technically we're looking at a loading screen, but you wouldn't think it. So we're making our way into the game now. I'm going to flick through those options like we always do, and we are in it. So again, we can go ahead, start the game just like we've done before. And yes, I would say right now, while we let the car get destroyed and we carry on, that the game is running fine. I'd say the loading there might have even been a pinch quicker than the internal, actually. And I'll be honest, that's the first time I've died on one of these test videos for you guys. But that's enough, I think, from this game. Let's move on to our next title. I'm going to be a little bit more free-flowing it here rather than cutting between these, just to kind of explain why I've picked them. Now, Control, as we've mentioned previously, Control can be loaded, I think, for these bench tests directly from the PlayStation's main XMB menu, because from here, it's a very fast load. There's very little interference and everything can be skipped. So for Control, we're going to load it directly from the PSN interface here. So let's go ahead. 1, 2, 3. Have that load in there in the background. We've got some logos to skip through, nice and quick. And here we are going directly into the game. And I'll be honest, that was actually quite prompt. I'm quite impressed by that. You can see why this drive is getting quite a good rep going around. But ultimately, I think that's doing rather well. I'm looking forward to seeing how this drive compares with other heavy-hitting SSDs that we've tested in the last week or so. But for now, fair play to it. That was a very steady load process for this SSD. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it performs in some slightly denser games coming up. But for now, let's exit this game and make our way on to the next test game. And that is going to be Maneater, originally a PS4 game that has been migrated over to PS5 with upscale graphics and loading. And this is another game that has big publisher logos and nonsense at the beginning. So again, there's a couple of pop-ups So again, we're not going to bench test the load time of this game from here. I know you've heard me say this so many times in previous videos recently. I've got to take for granted that some people are not going to watch all of them, so I'm going to have to be a bit repetitious. So thanks for your patience if you have watched all of those videos recently. But as we're making our way through this, we'll be at the title screen shortly. Don't worry. See what I mean? It takes ages. This isn't even the full loading yet. We're still waiting to get all the way to that beginning screen right there. And here we are at the Maneater title screen. Now, I should mention, due to the number of times we've played this game, the save spot's a fraction further. So when this does load into the game, it's going to be ever so slightly different. But for now, let's make our way into Maneater and have a little look at how they compare. 1, 2, 3. Again, slightly quicker snap there into the selection of the game save. That's not really, anything to do with the SSDs. I've just happened to go into it a little quicker, but that's not really something we can reflect onto the SSD itself. We're in the world, if you will, and we're in the game. And I'll be honest, that was pretty quick indeed. Here we are in the world of Maneater there, and I think for now we've got the world. Everything seems to be in there. It's all pretty good. I think for now what we can do is start making our way into the fourth game in our series. As mentioned, we did drop Destiny because of kind of slight unpredictable server communications while it's in process. But for now, let's go into Wreckfest for this game. This is another one that we're going to go from the title screen. It's got a bunch of mini options all the way out. We're going to skip through them pretty darn quick. But for now, we're going to let this game load up, and it's going to go into kind of the tutorial level where you're riding what I think is a mower or something. But we're going to let this game load up. Here we are at that title screen there. But for now, let's get ready and compare them, and get ready to compare them on screen with the WD Black versus the internal storage. Let's go. 1, 2, 3. And there we are. And again, if for those that didn't watch my other video, the loading screen there will stop at 50% for no reason. We don't know why. It's super annoying, to be honest, given the SSD speeds we're talking about here. But it will start in just a moment, and we will be in that game lovely and quickly. Go in, and here we are. We are in the field, riding lawnmowers in some sort of battle royale mode, which I won't really understand. And again, for those of you that have critiqued my complete inability to play this game in the other videos, I'm sat in the strangest position right now, trying to use the microphone while screen recording with pieces of SSDs and stuff all darted around me here. But for now, I think this is all pretty fair and well. The game is running. I may have just killed a guy. I don't feel great about that. But yeah, so let's come out of this game and make our way into the final test game, which is a Playtale Innocence, which is over here. So again, this is another game that we load from the title screen. Again, do stay tuned for the versus and comparison SSD videos next week, where we will be using those aggressive games as mentioned. They'll probably land about Tuesday or Wednesday, so do stay tuned for those. But for now, let's make our way onto the title screen of Playtale. This is a game that really surprised me, actually. I mentioned it in the other video. I didn't realise just how compelling the story for this game was, and the more I learned about it, the more I now want to play it. It was just a throwaway PS Plus game, but let's continue. Tap X, we're going to load our save game as well, because that's on the internal storage, so we're not going to include that in this process. We feel that might hamper it a bit, so we're going to select that slot. And from here, we're going to test and compare the loading from this point. Okay, so this is the last game. 1, 2, 3. And we're making our way into the game now. So again, we're very much at the start of the game, just ever so slightly into the tutorial for this, but the game does load remarkably quickly on the internal storage. I'll be really interested to see how quick this is going to be. We're in that little weird forest bit there. Again, I'm just going to try and replicate everything I've done on the other save, but it seemingly has loaded quite well. And remember, this is quite a beautiful game and one that's whole world creation here. Sort of games that SSDs like this are primarily designed for large amounts of data and textures and assets to be required incredibly quickly. While this game has just got so much going on throughout. So, yep, I think I would say this game is still running pretty darn well. And fair play, the WD Black certainly delivers very, very well. As any earlier concerns I had about the smaller capacities and how they would compare in terms of that write sequential read, although we can't actually measure that right now, and obviously that's not really a factor of the beta. We don't know how that's going to go in the future. Fair play, the WD Black has done a sterling job today. And you know what? I'm really looking forward to seeing how this SSD and the FireCuda and the 980 Pro and the Sabrent all together are going to compare in our comparisons next week. But otherwise, for now, let's move these games back onto the core storage because we've still got a couple more SSDs to test here. The PNY and the Viper are still to be done this week, and we'll be touching on those. But for now, let's move these games back. Again, as much as I'd love to be able to give you a measurement here, because the reason I include this bit at the end, someone asked me about this, why do I include on these videos the ability or showing you guys about moving games back from the M2 and onto the PlayStation? I do it for two reasons. One, because in this scenario, the drive is being read from. So the WD Black right now is having read activity, and it's the internal SSD of the PlayStation that is the one that's having write activity. And the reason I include this is because earlier on in the video, when we moved the games to the external SSD or the expansion SSD slot, it was very, very slow. And I highlighted to you guys the reason for that is the PlayStation is clearly doing some kind of encryption, compression, or security packaging and testing and checking internally, perhaps for piracy. And this was just to prove that point further, because just in case people see the movement onto the SSD as slow and go, whoa, that means the drive's got terrible sequential write. That doesn't mean that. And having this situation reversed in this fashion at the end of the video only further highlights that it's something in the middle between the internal SSD and the expansion SSD that creates this bottleneck that we see here. But this has been the PlayStation 5 expansion testing of the WD Black SN850. As always, we're updating the links of the compatible products, the compatible SSDs and heatsinks, so do go to the description for the latest updates on that compatibility list. On top of that, I will of course be doing those comparison videos very, very soon, where we learn more and more about what this expansion SSD slot can do, and ultimately, what are the best SSDs right now that the PlayStation can take advantage of. Click like if you've enjoyed this video, subscribe if you want to learn more and be kept abreast of the videos coming next week and that big old bell on screen. And of course, visit the articles over at NAS Compares, where we are doing written articles and lots of GIFs and mini analysis of a lot of the things that we talked about in these videos, along with the free data storage advice area for DAS, for NAS, for Thunderbolt, for storage, for cloud, you name it. It's a free advice service. We give it away to help people, and I hope it does. It's completely for free. It's manned by two guys, me and Eddie. What you got to lose? I'll see you on the next video.